James Robertson did not choose French Lick by rumor or accident. He chose it because, for more than a decade, the men who knew the western wilderness best had been quietly mapping it for him. By the early 1760s, a distinct class of frontier explorers, the Long Hunters, had begun operating far beyond the Appalachian barrier. They came chiefly from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and the Carolina backcountry, settling along the upper Holston and New Rivers. Each fall, they departed with pack horses, powder and lead, traps and tools, prepared to live for months and sometimes years beyond settlement, repairing their own rifles deep in the wilderness. They returned in the spring with furs and with knowledge. These were not settlers, they were scouts, hunters, and pathfinders. Their stories spoke of a land west of the Cumberland Mountains, rich in game, crossed by buffalo roads and ancient Indian traces, a country untouched by fences or farms. Henry Skaggs reached the Cumberland Basin as early as 1762 and stood at a vast salt lick where buffalo gathered in staggering numbers. The hunters called it French Lick. Others followed. James Smith wandered the interior for nearly a year, tracing the Holston, Tennessee, Cumberland, and Ohio rivers, proving the western country was not chaos, but a connected world of waterways. Isaac Lindsay reached the mouth of the Stones River, showing that the Cumberland could be traveled by boat. Then came the great hunting parties, Caspar Mansker, the Bledsoe brothers, Joseph Drake, Uriah Stone. Stone would give his name to the river that flowed upstream from French Lick, the Stones River, a permanent mark of the Long Hunters' passage across the Cumberland frontier. Together they crossed the mountains again and again, rediscovering the salt licks, mapping valleys, and proving that this land could sustain life and trade. Mansker, towering, illiterate, but among the finest riflemen on the frontier, ranged farther than most. On one of his early hunts deep in the Cumberland country, Mansker unexpectedly encountered Piamingo, the powerful Chickasaw chief whose people hunted the region. For a moment, death seemed certain, but Piamingo, measuring the hunter before him, chose restraint. He stripped Mansker of his furs, the season's hardest to earn wealth, but spared his life. It was a lesson the frontier would repeat often. French Lick lay not in empty wilderness, but as the crossroads of Indian power. Yet the Chickasaw did not claim it as a permanent town. It remained a shared hunting ground, open, contested, and unoccupied. The Bledsoes marked their licks. French trader Timothy de Montbriam built a post along the river, opening the country to commerce. Thomas Spencer, a giant of a man, noted for spending a winter in a sycamore tree, gave the French Lick its name after Timothy de Montbriam. By the early 1770s, the valley lay bleached with buffalo bones, the last echo of herds that once darkened the plain. But hunters were not the only men to recognize French Lick's importance. Soldiers soon followed the same path. As the colonies drifted towards revolution, military leaders began to study the western rivers as highways of future war. Among them was George Rogers Clark. Moving through the Ohio and Cumberland systems, Clark learned what the Long Hunters already knew, that whoever controlled the rivers would control the interior of the continent. He saw how the Cumberland cut deep into the southern frontier, how French Lick sat at the meeting of water routes, traces, and hunting grounds, and he acted on it. In a letter to Virginia Governor Patrick Henry in 1779, Clark referred to a tract he had purchased 3 years ago at the Great French Lick, land he described as containing 3,000 acres. He made it clear he could not afford to lose it. This was not casual speculation. Even before his famous Illinois campaign, Clark was securing the strategic heart of the frontier, sites where forts, towns, and supply lines would one day stand. By the time James Robertson weighed his future, French Lick was no mystery. It had been explored by hunters, tested by traders, measured by soldiers. Many of the men who knew it best passed through the same Holston settlements Robertson called home. They told him where the rivers ran, where the buffalo gathered, where danger lay, and where opportunity waited. Once before, Robertson had heard such stories. Once before, men had spoken of a distant valley called Watauga, land beyond the mountains that others said could not be held. And once before, Robertson had gone anyway. He had cut a settlement from wilderness. He had built a community where none had stood before. Now the same pull stirred again. The Cumberland country rose in every account as a richer, wider, and more secure crossroads of river and trace, a place hunters knew, soldiers valued, and traders already used. Now he had to see this promised land for himself, just as he once had with Watauga, only this time he would not go alone. This would not be a lone cabin on a distant creek. It would be a migration. Families, fighters, surveyors, a colony moving as one. The Long Hunters had revealed it. Clark had staked his future. The rivers had opened the road. All that remained was the launch. And in the spring of 1779, Robertson turned his face once more toward the wilderness, toward the salt licks of the Cumberland, toward French Lick, toward the settlement that would become Nashville.